Hi, everyone. Welcome to Leadership at the Beach conference for fall 2020. And this year's theme is social justice and action. And I'm a presenter. My name is Wendy, and I will be talking about breaking the bamboo ceiling, eliminating Asian Americans' barriers to success in the workplace. So the purpose of this workshop is, first of all, to define the term and also inform you guys of the biases and barriers that Asian Americans often face in the American workplace, and also to encourage you guys to examine the impact of your own cultural backgrounds and how that would affect your leadership development, and as well as the systematic structure of organizations in place that impedes Asian Americans from management roles and executive positions. And lastly, I'm going to offer some suggestions on what you could do to start preparing yourself for leadership roles in the workplace. So first of all, the term bamboo ceiling was coined by a Korean American corporate consultant named Jing Hung, and she wrote the book Breaking the Bamboo Ceiling: Career Strategies for Asians in 2005. And this metaphor is similar to the glass ceiling, which we use to refer to women and minorities in the workplace that could see this glass ceiling but cannot reach them. So this is a comparison to stereotypes, biases, and racism and discrimination. And according to Jane Han, the bamboo ceiling is a combination of individual, cultural, and organization factors. Some statistics on underrepresentation. As we can see, Asian Americans are the most successful minority demographic in the United States. We are the most educated with the highest income. Asian Americans make up about almost 50% of the professionals in Silicon Valley tech companies, but only about a quarter of those are in executive positions. And we have a quote here: though Asians are the largest racial cohort in the Silicon Valley, they're also the least likely to be promoted to manager and executive positions, less than Hispanic and African Americans. And this phenomenon is not just prevalent in the private sphere, also in the public and civil level as well. While Asian Americans are 9.8% of the federal professional workforce in 2016, they're only accounted for about half, 4.4% of the workforce at the highest federal level. So the bamboo ceiling is an actual phenomenon that is prevalent and going on across the nation, not just a term coined by one author. And we have not seen significant improvement in statistics in recent years. So we're going to talk about what are the factors in place that are preventing Asian Americans from being promoted, from being recognized to leadership positions. So from a workshop survey of 40 young professionals aged 23 to 35, they reported different things that they noticed about Asian Americans in the workforce. And it's a mix of good and bad. It's a mix of positive and then not so positive. There's good things like Asians are smart, well-educated, good at math and science. They're always busy working, and they're loyal. And then there's the not so positive ones, such as they're submissive, they don't ask a lot of questions, they're not involved with the community, not fluent in English, and perceived as foreigners. So the items underlined are stereotypes and biases against Asian Americans. Now, we're not going to go into whether those stereotypes are true or not. We're going to focus on why the stereotypes came to be and how culture may influence how we're perceived by other demographics in the American workplace. So I have a quote here. "My brother and I were raised to not talk unless we're spoken to," said Wes Trump, 40, who works as the chief of staff or IBM's chief brand officer. And this quote was taken from South China Morning Post. So this Asian American professional is high up in the leadership ladder, and he was being reflective of how his culture might have influenced the way he behaved in the workplace and how that might have hindered him from being recognized We were told to work hard and the results would come to you. Now, this is reflective of the Asian values we're oftenly taught growing up, such as being disciplined, self-effacing, being humble, patient, respectful, reticent, and being obedient towards authority and elders. And these are common values that are instilled in Asian household, whether you're first generation, second generation, or third generation. And these are prominent traditions that are being passed on from generation to generation. So I have a chart that compares Asian American values to mainstream Western values, America in particular. Now, this chart is not only reflective of society's values, and it's also reflective of workplace value of what is being seen as a potential leader in the American workforce. So as we can see, there's spontaneity, casualness, being sociable, being able to make small talks, risk-taking, and sometimes even aggressive. And then there's also confidence to question authority, to challenge those above you, thinking outside of the box, and also being tough and individualistic. Now, when we look at Asians' value in comparison, we're taught to be self-disciplined, speaks only when spoken to, being patient, acceptance of uncertainty, respecting those that lead, those that have seniority, having a modest attitude, being humble, and giving everybody credit, and being aware that it's a collective effort and has a strong sense of teamwork. So when we place Asian American values right next to Western values and we juxtapose those two, we can see that the exact traits that we teach our children is the exact opposite of what's needed to be successful in the American corporate world. So then there's the question, how do we actually break the bamboo ceiling? Now there's two levels. One is the organizational level and one is the individual level. Organization level meaning that the responsibility to include more diversity in leadership styles and not be fixated on the traditional leadership style favored in corporate America. This responsibility comes from the organization themselves. Companies have to understand that there is more than just one effective leadership method, and that it's essential to have open and visible support from the CEOs and the executive team. And organizations should also take initiative to identify high potential Asian American professionals and provide culturally specific leadership trainings. And I have a quote here coming from an Asian American. That calm style of leadership, thought process focused leadership can also be very valuable and be a balance to what is preferred, which is the hard charging, jocular, and non-differential leadership style that is dominant in Americans' work culture. Now, change takes a long time, many years, even many decades, and it takes a lot of advocacy in policy in order for that to happen. So what can we do as individuals to progress further on the corporate ladder? And that is to seek out ways to improve skill sets and qualities that American workplace values, such as having a mentor, self-promoting, communicating, and behaving assertively. And qualities that specifically appeal to American employers are confidence, charisma, creativity, self-assurance, and some risk-taking. Now, there are 4 ways to develop your leadership skills that I recommend. Number 1 is definitely to speak up. Asian Americans are often taught to remain quiet and respectful to authority and those with more seniority. And I have a quote from the author. In Asia, there's a saying that the loudest duck gets shot. In America, it's the opposite. The squeakiest wheel gets the grease. Now, this is a great quote that exemplify the behavioral practices between Asian Americans and the dominant white culture. Speaking up means actively sharing your thoughts and ideas in meetings and group discussions. This demonstrates interest and enthusiasm in your work and also shows creativity. When you present new ideas, shows that you're able to think out of the box. And in the contrary, not speaking up may be perceived as being disinterested or being inattentive. So as minorities, it's important to know that we may never be given a chance to speak if we don't take the initiative. And the second most important characteristic that we need to learn is to self-promote. I have another quote from the author. Most Asians are taught from an early age to be self-effacing and put the community ahead. There's a Japanese saying that says the tallest nail gets hammered down. So the idea of putting yourself forward or marketing yourself or even taking credit for your own achievements, these are alien concepts. So this is a difficult concept because remaining humble and modest about our own achievements is something that's discouraged in Asian American culture. This concept is heavily hammered in us during our childhood years. We're told to not boast or brag about what is being done right. We're told to be self-critical on what are things that we could improve to do better. And it's always increase your expectations of yourself and always remaining reflective and pointing out the things that you've been doing wrong instead of doing right. And that is exactly what is not being practiced in corporate America. In the American workplace, there's a lot of self-promotion, advocating for yourself during promotion season, and reminding everyone of the amount of work effort that you put in. So in this culture where everybody is trying to get ahead, when you're not vocal about your accomplishments, they could easily go unrecognized. And I have a small anecdote about myself, about my first job out of college. I was an assistant for a director, and she's a white woman in her 40s or 50s. And when I left the job, I asked her for one piece of advice that she could give me on my career. And she said to toot my own horn. And that's a concept that I wasn't aware of until she reminded me that if I don't remind the team, the department, and the company of my contributions, I could be easily seen as replaceable and that I'm not doing a good job. So I would say that this is perhaps one of the most important traits that Asian Americans need to learn in order to be recognized and be promoted. So the third way is to network. Now, regardless of your race and ethnicity, when you're a entry-level young professional, it's important for you to reach out and not to keep to yourselves and behave in a reserved manner as we're told to. And one of the important ways to network is to initiate small talk with people in your work environment to get to know their past experiences. And most importantly, to get to know their circle of connections. Now, there's a concept of the strength of weak ties published by sociologists in 1973. And is that although you may only have a limited number of strong ties, although you only have a limited amount of people that will vouch for you and advocate for you, each of those branch off to their own circle of connections, their own little network. And then when you go back and look at the graph, you realize your connection and your network is actually a lot larger than you realized. And research have shown that weak ties is the #1 way for people to get hired. Now, this is not only helpful and pertinent to job search, this is also beneficial to your career advancement. The few connections you have at work, you never know who they may know that may help you on your next project. You never know what kind of connection that they have that might be willing to partner with you to help you manage your next task. So, in summary, keep in mind that when you initiate small talks with people in your work environment, you're not just getting to know them, you're also getting to know who they may know that could be a helpful weak tie in the future. And lastly, is finding a mentor. Again, regardless of your race or ethnicity, it's always important to have a mentor in the professional world. And it could be challenging if you don't have an expansive network, since you guys are all college students and have not had a lot of work experience. A good tip is to start by joining professional organizations that offer mentorship services. For example, Asian American Professional Association in LA, National Asian American Association of Professionals, and Leadership Education for Asian Pacifics. This is a nonprofit organization that also offer leadership training as well. Now, a mentor who's Asian American might be more receptive and willing to become your mentor and also give you suggestions on working as a minority. But a non-Asian mentor could point out the ways that you may be perceived to individuals of other cultures. This will help you become better adjusted and is able to expand your perspectives. So keep in mind, there shouldn't be a preference of what race or ethnicity your mentor is, regardless of what it is. You'll find it very helpful and beneficial, and there are different things that you could learn. So I want to go back and talk a little bit about organizations. As a young professional, the first few years you might be moving around and figuring out what you like and what you don't like. But eventually, there's going to be a point where you want to stay in one place and you want to be at a place where you have growth potential. Now, growth potential is not absent for Asian Americans. It is the executive levels and the high managerial positions that are absent for Asian Americans. So if you're somebody who has high aims on the corporate ladder, you want to think about organizations. You want to pay attention to whether the organization you're joining is open-minded about having different leadership styles, and that they have an ethos that encourages diversity and multiculturalism, and that they're aware of the institutional and systematic justice. And lastly, they're willing to fund and train Asian Americans in a cultural specific context. So if you end up in an organization that have some of these characteristics listed, it might be safe to say that the ceiling is not so hard to reach after all, and that they are open-minded and willing to include Asian Americans in their leadership team. So I have some helpful resources for you guys if you want to do some further reading. Of course, there's the book by Jing Hung. Now, I have down here a couple of organizations that offer leadership training, and it's series of classes that you could take, as well as workshops and presentations that you could look into. And lastly, there's also Conference on Asian American Leadership, and you could also search on the website to see what are some conferences happening around your area. This is a list of references that I use for this presentation. And if you have time, I urge you to check it out. The Atlantic, Forbes, and Harvard Business Review have great articles on the statistics, as well as interviews with Asian American professionals and their struggles and their personal stories. So this is it for this workshop. I hope you guys are able to walk away with something new and that you found this workshop interesting or helpful. And and thank you for joining the Social Justice and Action Leadership Conference this year. I think that this is taking place at a very crucial time. You guys are witnessing a lot of transitions and events going on in our country right now. Hopefully, the information that you learn from these workshops could inspire you to have more passion for social justice and advocacy. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.